Thank you very much, David, for organising today. It's fantastic to be here, and it's fantastic also to be here with the LME. I am a member of the LME, and as we've been going around all of London, there's 73 CLPs in total, so it's a massive undertaking, but I think all of us, like I say, we're having fun, and everywhere we go we see real engagement in Europe, real passion and desire to hear about the issues that we want to talk about, and that, I think, reaffirms certainly my belief and faith in this party, and the LME illustrates just how powerful the message is that we have as a party on Europe, and I think it's really important that we stress it and that we come together in occasions like this to reaffirm it. So in terms of thanking the EU, I think that the first thing that we need to put upmost in our minds is peace. Now it sounds flippant, and people say, oh well, it's impossible that we could ever go to war again. But if you went back to the 1920s and you were to say that a country like Germany would be taken over by a bunch of criminals and would gallivant across Europe, enslaving half the population and trying to wipe out an entire race of people, they'd have said you were pretty bonkers. Because Germany in 1920 was a fairly liberal place, and Berlin was a fairly liberal place, and then look what happened. The second thing I think we need to be very conscious of when we thank the EU is cooperation. In a globalised world, it's more important than ever that countries are able to work together and that the systems are in place to enable that to happen. And the EU is one of the best, if not the best, examples of cooperation internationally. And the third thing, which comes out of the first two, is of course legislation. Now there's many areas, clean air, for example, food standards, as has been mentioned, but also workplace rights. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in just a second. In terms of changing the EU, I think it's important that we look at the democratic deficit. It's not that the EU isn't democratic or doesn't have bodies that are democratic, but we have to acknowledge that there is a gap between the perception of what the EU does and who it represents and Europe's citizens. And I think fundamental to that is strengthening the role of the Parliament, but also increasing the number of socialist MEPs because we have the right vision. We understand cooperation. We will work for the citizens of Europe, unlike, as you see, UKIP and the Tories going off on their own and not working for the common good. The third thing that I think is essential when we talk about changing the EU is looking at the quality of life and investment in infrastructure and jobs. And again, I want to touch on that very briefly in just a second. When we talk about UKIP and Euroscepticism, a lot of issues come up, whether it be immigration, whether it be housing, access to services, but actually Europe is not, or doesn't tend to be, the number one issue that people raise. It tends to be the issues that I mentioned before, and Europe is seen as an excuse, a scapegoat. But I think that the campaign should put Europe right at the heart. The campaign not just for the European elections, but also the local elections in 2014, and of course the general election in 2015. And there are three things that I want to put right at the heart of the campaign. The first I touched on a little earlier was social Europe. It's the only thing that David Cameron has actually proposed in his big Europe speech that was trailed and expected for weeks. When he finally gave it, it was all about stripping away those rights and protections, nothing else. Because that's the real agenda. That's why they want to question our membership of the European Union, and we need to fight it. The second thing is economic and social justice. The Tories are only interested in representing the status quo. It's us fighting with our sister parties that are setting the agenda in making sure that work pays and that the relationship between work and pay is a fairer relationship. And the third and vital aspect is on jobs. Because the Tories are disinterested in the prospect of an entire generation of young people being locked out of work for good. That's a potential catastrophe, and it's not just a catastrophe in London or the UK, but across Europe. And it's us, working with our sister parties, that are investing in schemes like the European Youth Guarantee, which provide pathways into work for young people. It's absolutely essential. What I want to do is make sure that these messages filter down to the doorstep during the local campaign, during the European campaign, and during the campaign for the general election. Because I want not just Labour to be at the heart of Europe, but Europe at the heart of Labour. That's my vision. That's the priorities I have for my campaign, so I hope you will consider choosing me, Seb Dance, as your #1 candidate. Thank you very much.